Hello and welcome to the business interview. I'm Markus Karlsson. The Arab uprisings changed the face of the Middle East and North Africa, but more than a year after the uprisings started in earnest, the region's economies, they're still facing an uphill battle. Jobless rates in the Middle East and North Africa, they're still the highest in the world. Just take this for instance, youth unemployment in this region is 25%. For more on the situation and what can be done, I'm joined by Lars Tunnell. He's the chief executive of the International Finance Corporation. That, of course, is the private sector lender of the World Bank, and it works throughout the Middle East and North Africa. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Let's look at the situation at the moment, first of all. What do these very high jobless rates actually mean for the economies in the Middle East and North Africa?
Well, it's a major source of frustration, and that's what we really saw in the Arab Spring, was that people wanted to be part of the community. They wanted jobs, they wanted something meaningful to do. And so this is one of the big challenges now, is how do we create jobs for the people there? And with half of the population being younger than 25 or 30 years, it is a big issue. And as you said, 25% youth unemployment, which by the way is also for the people who are graduating from university. Even there you got very high unemployment rates.
What do we do about this problem then? What is missing? Why cannot North African economies in particular add these jobs?
Well, we at IFC are working on two sides. So first of all, we had already started identifying, we had identified the problem, and we did a study together with the Islamic Development Bank that looked at why couldn't you find better employment with the education that actually were there already. And it was very clear that we need to bridge much better the education with the skills that are necessary for jobs. Mm-hmm. So that is one thing that we are working on. So
there's a lag there in between the needs of the actual economies and the people who are being educated.
Basically state-driven universities with no feeling for markets, teaching the old skills that are not relevant, not the modern skills, not also what I would call the soft skills. In other words, how do you behave when you get a job? Many of these young children and youth have not seen what a workplace is really like. So you need to teach them that part of this whole thing also. So that is one thing that's very important. The other one is that in most countries around the world, in most economies, the small and medium-sized enterprises are the job creators. That's where the majority of people find jobs. It's not,
and there's not enough investment going into the SMEs?
And there is not. There is very tough regulations. It's hard to start a company. It is not support. If you look at how was the whole Arab Spring, where did it start? It started by a vendor out on the street who was harassed by the police. That's why he put himself on fire, because he was so frustrated. This is just shows the problems for the smaller entrepreneurs.
And how do you boost those smaller and medium-sized companies in particular?
What we do at IFC is that we work with the government in trying to improve the investment climate. In other words, make it easier to start a company. Sometimes it's very, very costly to start, or you have to fill in lots of forms and takes a long time to get your permission and license. So we work with the investment climate. We then work with the banks, who normally are not really focused on lending to small and medium-sized enterprises, and help them to develop products and train their staff in how do you actually lend to smaller companies. And we sometimes share risk with them also.
But if we look at the region at the moment, a lot of the focus is on democratic reform in countries like Morocco, Tunisia, Libya, as well as Egypt. How do you convince governments that actually you need to look into how you support your small and medium-sized businesses? Because
I think they understand that's the driving force. So that what we've seen after the crisis is that there is much more focus on that. So you also need to train the entrepreneurs themselves, which we do in some of the skills, and trying to set up vocational training. So we got teams now in the various countries working on those issues.
Are you an optimist or a pessimist at this stage? Because of course a lot of the populations, or a lot of the people in these countries, they're getting frustrated after the Arab uprisings.
I think one has to be very optimistic, because we had the Arab uprising. There was dictatorships that were taken aside. So I think that is the good news. But obviously, we've seen that after any revolution, it takes time to get things going again and get the economy going. And that's where I think we should not expect any quick fixes. This is going to be a long haul process.
When I speak to people who could be investing in North Africa, they're sort of saying at the moment, we're going to wait and see what happens. We're going to have to see stability, for instance, for at least 5 years before we even start thinking about investing in these economies. What do you say to that?
I'll say I think there is a business opportunity now. We have actually worked with a number of firms who are invested. We ourselves put $2.2 billion into the region last calendar year.
In what sectors did you put that
Well,
money?
it was very broad-based. We did in Iraq, for example, with Lafarge, a cement factory. We did with a regional, that's very interesting, you're starting to see regional companies now coming up. One Jordanian company who want to go pan-Arabic in the generic pharmaceutical industry. We work with banks. We had another South-South, what we call it, investments, an Indian company who set up a pulp and paper company in Egypt. So, and then banks all across the region are working with.
Naturally, though, when it comes to investment in North Africa and the Middle East, a lot of the attention goes to the gas and oil sector. You're saying that actually there are other sectors but that one.
Yes, I think that's actually very important because the job sectors are not, or the oil sectors are not really the ones driving the economy. They're very good, but you easily get to the Dutch disease, as it's called, that you rely too heavily on oil and gas and things like that. If you look at Algeria, they with Sonatrach, it is
The Algerian state-owned.
Yeah, the state-owned oil company. It's kind of putting it's beneficial for the country, but it's kind of stifling other growth of other companies around there. So I think that's one of the things you need to see in all these countries, the diversification of the economy.
Now, how are the North African economies feeling the pinch from the Eurozone debt crisis and the weakness that we're seeing currently in the Eurozone? How are they being hit?
Well, as you said, I think many companies are looking after their financial status in like the European companies, and they are, of course, a little bit more afraid of taking riskier things and doing riskier investments. So you see that. And then you have the fact that the European banks are deleveraging. They are reducing their balance sheet. They're not extending loans, especially in areas that are not in kind of their core business. So they are leaving a little bit the emerging markets, including the Middle East, and that we see that very, very clearly. And that's why we have gone in and tried to support local banks to replace them partly.
Now, I want to change tack a little bit because there's an ongoing debate on who's going to replace the head of the World Bank, Robert Zoellick, when he steps down in the summer. There's also an ongoing debate on who's going to replace you when you too step down in the summer. What do you make of the media attention at the moment?
Well, I think it's good to have an open debate about both positions, but it's of course up to the board and the shareholders to decide on who's going to run the organizations.
Now, there are currently reports that the Americans, that they want to hold on to the position at the head of the World Bank, the position that Robert Zoellick is currently in, but there are rumours that perhaps the emerging economies, or one of many emerging economies, they're eyeing the potential of putting their man or woman into your job. Do you think that could provide a little bit more balance between developed and developing economies?
I think, as I said, it's up for the board and the owners to decide who's going to run these organizations. I think the more and more we're moving toward a process of merit-based, and I think that's what's going to happen over time.
But what do you think of the signals, so to speak, that it would send to have someone from an emerging economy taking your job, for instance? Isn't that an important principle to be looking at those kind of things at this stage?
In general, diversity is very, very important. And if you look at IFC, we have 90 nationalities, and in my management team we have many different nationalities from emerging markets and from developed countries. Mixes are always good.
All right. It doesn't sound as if you're going to give us any inside tips on who could take Robert Zoellick's jobs and who could take yours.
I don't think that's my job to do that.
I just want to finish up a little bit about where do you think the global economy is heading at this stage? There's a lot of talk about a Eurozone recession. There's talk about the recovery, so to speak. Just briefly for us, characterize where you think that we are.
Well, I think given the liquidity that has been provided with by the European Central Bank, I think we right now have a rather calm market. But obviously the growth rates in the world has come down both in the developed world and also in the developing world. I think the World Bank now is forecasting 5.4% for the emerging markets, and that's not a bad number. So I think we have to get out a little bit of our European perspective and look at what's happening out there and the business opportunities there. But in general, I think it's a very fragile situation. I think there can easily be shocks. We are going to, I can't even predict that we're going to have shocks. I don't know exactly what they are, but they're going to be shocks.
Christine Lagarde, she's warned about rising oil prices. Is that a potential shock for you?
That's a shock. We have had, if you look at the last 2 years, we had a number of natural catastrophes like the tsunami or the high floods that affected the world economy. We have elections or change of government in many big countries. I mean, France, US, China, and India has kind of a political stalemate right now. So there is a lot of political uncertainty also in the world. So a muddled through scenario, but with high risks but also opportunities in the emerging markets.
Fragile seems to be the key word. Yeah. All right, Lars Thunell, thanks very much indeed, the Chief Executive of the International Financial Corporation. And thank you for watching. With that, we're going to wrap up the business interview. Do stay with us here at France 24. More news is coming up soon.